Hi guys! How are you today? Welcome back to my channel, Adventures in America. If you're new to my channel, my name is Jocelyn, and today we are going to talk about the updated arrival guidelines in Manila starting June 22nd. However, please take note there is currently an entry ban for those passengers within the last 14 days in the following countries: India, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Oman, and United Arab Emirates. So those passengers from these countries in the last 14 days are not allowed to enter in the Philippines, except that if they are merely in transit or has a layover in these countries, then you may be allowed to enter in the Philippines. Also, those overseas Filipino workers who are under the repatriation program of the government, they are allowed to enter the Philippines but must comply with the strict quarantine requirements of 14 days. Also, the government has imposed a new quarantine requirements for those fully vaccinated in the Philippines. Also, there is a separate quarantine requirements for those unvaccinated and those vaccinated outside the Philippines. And I'm going to discuss both procedures in this video. Also, please remember that the Philippine government has not yet opened up for international tourism. So foreign tourists are not allowed entry. These foreign tourists are those without an immediate family members, such as a spouse or a child in the Philippines. So these foreign tourists are not yet allowed to enter in the Philippines even if you are fully vaccinated. The other eligible passengers are first Filipino nationals, because Filipino nationals have the right to travel. And these Filipino nationals and other foreign nationals who are allowed to travel at this time, they must have a pre-booked quarantine facility for at least 10 days if you are unvaccinated or vaccinated outside the Philippines. Now, for those fully vaccinated in the Philippines, a pre-booked 7 days of hotel quarantine is required. And the hotels must be accredited by the Department of Health or Department of Tourism. Other eligible passengers are dual citizens, former Filipinos, and other foreign nationals with valid and existing visas. However, foreign parent or foreign spouse who has a Filipino spouse in the Philippines or who has a child in the Philippines, you must secure an entry exemption document from the Department of Foreign Affairs or the National Task Force Against COVID-19. And also, you must have a visa before entering the Philippines. For former Filipinos, you can travel alone and you can avail of the balikbayan visa. And also, if you're a Filipino national and you have a foreign spouse traveling with you, and if you are traveling together, then both of you can avail of the balikbayan visa when you arrive at the port of entry in Manila. You just need to inform the officer that you are availing of the balikbayan visa, and the foreign national's country must be included in the executive order number 408 to be able to avail of the balikbayan visa. Also, if the former Filipino or Filipino national is traveling with their foreign children together, they can also avail of the balikbayan visa. The balikbayan visa is valid for 1 year from the time of your arrival, and this visa cannot be extended to any other family members, such as, let's say, a niece or a nephew or a grandchild or a grandparent. So the balikbayan visa is only available to a Filipino citizen traveling with their spouse or a foreign national spouse or foreign children. And also, the balikbayan visa is free of charge. There is no fee when you arrive in the Philippines to avail of this visa. Other foreign nationals allowed in the Philippines are those holders of a valid and existing visa. Also, the Bureau of Immigration provided a press release announcing that holders of SRRV visa or those special permit or resident retirees visa, they don't need an entry exemption document to enter the Philippines. Also, other eligible foreign nationals are those who have valid certificates or those who are in possession of an investor's visa, and those accredited by foreign governments like an official or dependents. So these are allowed entry in the Philippines because they possess a valid and existing visa. All other foreign nationals are not yet allowed. For example, student visa for foreign nationals, these are not yet allowed in the Philippines. So you need to contact the Department of Education or Commission on Higher Education when the student visa may be allowed. And other visa holders such as 9A visa for a foreign parent, you need an entry exemption document before entering. Otherwise, you will be denied boarding or denied entry. Also, one important clarification from the Bureau of Immigration is that if a foreign parent is traveling with a Filipino child, the foreign parent must secure an entry visa and an entry exemption document even though they are traveling together because they are not covered by the balikbayan visa. So it's important that foreign parents understand this rule. Otherwise, if you don't possess these documents, you will be denied entry or denied boarding. Before we proceed with the procedures regarding the arrival guidelines in Manila, the Bureau of Immigration and the Interagency Task Force on the Management of Infectious Diseases issued updated guidelines for those fully vaccinated in the Philippines starting June 22nd, and it will affect those passengers who are about to arrive in the Philippines and they were previously fully vaccinated or inoculated in the Philippines before this rule came out. So there are some clarifications, and if you don't abide by these rules, you will be subjected to the strict mandatory 14 days quarantine if you don't present the necessary documents upon arrival in the Philippines. Just to give you a backdrop, the Interagency Task Force implemented new guidelines for those fully vaccinated in the Philippines starting June 4th. However, there was a resolution number 122 issued on June 17th, and the implementation of these fully vaccinated individuals, the requirements will be moved to June 22nd. So it will be effective June 22nd. Now, the requirements are the fully vaccinated individuals in the Philippines must have a Prebook quarantine hotel facility for the first 7 days. And there will be no testing, there will be no RT-PCR test unless these passengers are symptomatic. So that is a better requirement than having a testing upon arrival or after a certain day. Now, the vaccines must be approved by the Philippine Food and Drug Administration or must have a special permit, such as the compassionate special permit for these vaccines to be acceptable in the Philippines. Now, the government defined who are fully vaccinated. There must be a gap of 2 weeks after the first and only dose, if there's only one dose required for the vaccine, such as Johnson & Johnson, and also if the vaccine requires 2 doses, then after the 2 dose, there must be a lapse of 2 weeks for you to be considered fully vaccinated. Now, the Philippine government is also requiring the validation of vaccine certificates. Now, before you depart from the Philippines, those who are vaccinated must present a vaccination card and a vaccination certificate from the Department of Information, Communications and Technology, or a vaccination certificate from the office of the local city health officer from the local government unit which administered your last dose of vaccination. So this is important. So you must have two, the vaccination card, the physical card, no digital copies or no photocopies, and a certificate of vaccination. Now let's go ahead and proceed with the arrival guidelines in Manila. So please remember, there are two separate requirements for those fully vaccinated in the Philippines and those unvaccinated and vaccinated outside the Philippines. So they are also separate. Now, regarding those passengers arriving in Manila, please remember what airline are you flying into, because it will affect what kind of ECIF or electronic case investigation form you are required to fill out. For those Philippine airline passengers, you have a separate ECIF for PAL passengers in Manila, and it must be filled out 3 days prior to your arrival. Now, for those flying through a different airline or a foreign airline, you needed to fill out the padlab.ph ECIF because it is needed as a requirement to take your COVID test. Now, also the requirement, another important requirement, because otherwise, if you don't have this requirement, you will be denied entry in the Philippines. For those vaccinated in the Philippines, you must have a pre-booked quarantine hotel facility for 7 days. For those unvaccinated and fully vaccinated outside the Philippines, you must have a pre-booked 10 days hotel quarantine, and the hotel must be accredited by the Department of Health or Tourism. Also, if you are flying to Manila, you are required to pre-book the hotel within Metro Manila. Now, the requirement of filling out these ECIF forms are at least 3 days before your arrival in the Philippines for those PAL passengers and also for those foreign airline passengers for PADLAB, a COVID test requirement. Now, the Philippine government requires 1 room per adult. However, there are 3 exceptions. And also, you can email the hotel directly, so your request may be accommodated, because sometimes couples or married couples arrive and they have to book a separate quarantine hotel facility, but you can email the hotel directly, or if you are a family traveling with small children. Now, here are the exceptions for the 1 room per adult requirement. First, if you have a minor child below 18 years of age, then you can have the minor child in the same room. Also, if you have a person with disability, then you can have the person in the same room with the adult. And the third exception is if the person has a medical condition or medical emergency, then you can be with the same adult in the same room. So these are the exceptions for the 1 room, 1 adult requirement. Now, aside from the ECIF, you also needed to fill out some other forms before you arrive at the airport, or fill out these forms during your flight. The 4 forms are: first, affidavit of undertaking, which should contain your personal information and your contact details in the Philippines. Second, the health and declaration form or waiver. And third, the Bureau of Customs card. And number 4, the arrival card. So these are important forms that you needed to fill out before arriving in the Philippines. Now, the cost of the RT-PCR test, which is done, for example, if you are fully vaccinated in the Philippines, you don't need a test, an RT-PCR test, unless you have symptoms within the first 7 days from the date of your arrival. If you are unvaccinated or vaccinated outside the Philippines, then you needed to pay for your PCR test, which costs 4,000 pesos. Now, if you are an overseas Filipino worker, you don't need to pay for this test because the Philippine government will shoulder your expenses for the swab test or your hotel accommodation. For all the other passengers, such as non-overseas Filipino workers and foreign nationals allowed to travel, then you must shoulder your own PCR test cost and the cost of your hotel accommodation. Now, if you have other children with you, they will also need to have like a separate ECIF or registration for ECIF, and they will also have to have their own RT-PCR test. So it will be paid separately for all of this, but you are going to shoulder the test and the cost is 4,000 pesos. Also, please remember the standard health protocols, wearing of a face mask and a face shield. You will still be required to wear a face shield when flying to the Philippines. And also one important consideration is the mandatory registration for Trace app mobile application, which is going to be used for contact tracing. So aside from the ECIF and all the mandatory forms when you arrive, you also needed to download and register for the Trace app for contact tracing purposes. Now, after clearing the immigration, you are now ready to check in at your quarantine hotel facility. On the day of your test, it will be on the 7th day if you are unvaccinated or vaccinated outside the Philippines. And for those who are fully vaccinated in the Philippines, you will not be required a test. So this is a new rule. So there will be no test for fully vaccinated in the Philippines unless you have symptoms within the first 7 days. Now I'm going to talk about the requirements for those unvaccinated or fully vaccinated outside the Philippines. Now, on the day of your test, which will be on the 7th day, you need to prepare your passport, your QR code, and a receipt for your test. Now, after administering your test, it will be given to you on the 9th day. So you will receive the results of your test on the 9th day. If you test positive, you will be subjected to medical management or you will be admitted to a hospital. Now, if you test negative, you will be issued a quarantine certificate before your checkout. Even if you receive your negative test result on the 9th day and your quarantine certificate on the 9th day, you will not be released until the 10th day. So you also need to complete the 10 days of quarantine hotel facility requirement for those vaccinated outside the Philippines or unvaccinated. Now, if you're done, then you can go home and complete your 4 days of home quarantine. Now, after the 10th day, you may call your relatives to pick you up, or a representative of the local government unit will pick you up. Then you may continue your home quarantine for the remaining 4 days. So those are the arrival guidelines for inbound passengers arriving at the Manila airport. If you recently traveled in the Philippines, please share your travel experience. And if you have any other questions or comments, please post them down below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Again, thank you guys for watching. And if you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. I always welcome new subscribers. Also, thank you guys for supporting my channel. I hope everyone is staying safe and have a great day.